Hi everyone! When you're done watching this lesson, you'll know all about the different styles of sculpture in ancient Greek art. When you think about Greek sculptures, you can probably picture a large white marble statue of a famous god or hero. While these types of sculptures are important, they are only a fraction of the Greek art that we have today. In fact, there are four main phases of ancient Greek sculpture that are distinct from one another. The first main period in Greek sculpture is known as the Archaic period. Art was produced in this style from 750 to 480 BCE, about 2,500 years ago. This is when Greek artists first began to make statues that looked more realistic than they had in the past. However, they couldn't quite shake the influential and less lifelike artistic styles of the Near East. The statue shown here is an archaic statue called the Kouros of Paros. There are a couple of defining characteristics of the Archaic period on display in this piece. First, take a look at the way he's standing. He's got his left foot forward, fist clenched, and his posture is stiff. This is known as a power stance and was very common in ancient Mesopotamian artwork, and is how pharaohs are often standing in Egyptian art. There are some other features of archaic statues that are very noticeable and distinct. Take a look at the mouth of the statue here, and you'll see what's known as the archaic smile. This means that the lips are in a straight line across with just the corners curving upwards. Here's another example of an archaic smile. Go ahead and try smiling like this at home. It's physically impossible to smile like this. The hair on archaic statues also typically doesn't look very realistic compared to the rest of the figure, and almost looks like a stiff wig with tight knots and braids instead of real hair. Finally, archaic figures generally have the same almond-shaped eyes. As we move into the next period of ancient Greek art, called the Transitional period, you can see that the artist's skills were beginning to evolve a little bit or become more sophisticated. In this period, which lasted from 480 to 450 BCE, we can see them starting to portray more movement and realistic features in the statues. This transitional Greek piece is called the Ludovisi throne, which is actually an altar. You can see that the characters on this piece are much more lifelike than the archaic figures from before. There is some debate as to what story is being depicted here, but it is likely either the story of the birth of the goddess Aphrodite rising from the sea foam, or the goddess Persephone rising from the underworld. Some ancient sculptures were of athletes or other notable humans. This piece is called the Charioteer of Delphi and is also from the Transitional period. You can see some of the remnants of the Archaic period in this statue, such as his rigid posture and almond-shaped eyes. However, like the Ludovisi throne, we see a bit more movement in this statue than in the Archaic period pieces, particularly in his hand extending outward to hold on to the reins of his chariot. There is also more attention given to detail overall, such as the curls in his hair, the way his chiton or robes look to be naturally draped, and the attention to detail paid in sculpting the charioteer's feet. Although it might not seem very important now, the feet of this charioteer were particularly admired in the ancient world. And that leads us to the third phase of ancient Greek art. This is called the Classical period, which lasted from 450 to 323 BCE, and is referred to as the height of Greek art. Statues in this period looked more beautiful, natural, and lifelike than ever before. This aliveness is partially due to the fact that sculptors were experimenting with different poses for statues. Rather than have statues stand straight and tall, they began carving statues standing in the contrapposto pose. Contrapposto means that the statues looked like they were leaning on one leg when they were standing, which is the natural standing position of most people. In addition to carving figures in more natural positions, artists also started adding supports, like trees and draped clothing to statues, so that the figures could appear to be moving in interesting ways without falling over. Remember that when you lean over, your body has muscles to support you and keep you from falling down. But stone is heavy, and sculptures would fall over without these seemingly random pieces of trees or cloth carved onto them. In ancient Greece, through the end of the Classical period, most of the sculptures produced were of gods, goddesses, or religious or mythological scenes. A notable aspect of classical sculpture is that the faces of many figures are androgynous, or don't look specifically male or female. This can make it difficult to identify which god or goddess a statue is when it is found. However, usually a statue is found with certain attributes that can help us solve this puzzle. Attributes are items associated with characters from mythology. For example, a lyre, or a small harp, indicates that a statue is Apollo, the god of poetry and music, or an apple and mirror are generally shown with Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. And finally, we arrive in the Hellenistic period, when we see the peak of Greek sculpture. In this period, from 323 to 100 BCE, art progressed even further. You can see very complex movement in statues, such as this crouching Aphrodite, the child struggling with a goose, or this gladiator fighting off a blow. Due to the social context in the Greek world at the time, people were beginning to commission artists to create sculptures that were more personal in nature, not necessarily just religious figures anymore. Art was now being made for private homes and personal use rather than just public monuments. Let's take a look at this piece called the Aphrodite of Melos, or the Venus de Milo, as you might know her. This is one of the most famous pieces of art in the world, and the original is currently housed at the Louvre in Paris. She embodies the Hellenistic art movement. Her body appears softer than previous statues of the goddess, and the way she is standing suggests real muscular movement to stay balanced as she stands. Although her arms have been lost to history, they might have once been reaching out for something. The detail in the drapery and her body's soft movement are indicative of a sophisticated artistic hand at work. Finally, let's take a look at this guy, the Borghese warrior, or a gladiator. His motion and muscles make him look like he could be an actual gladiator, frozen in time. However, if you look at him a little bit closer, you'll notice he's tensing every single muscle in his body seemingly at once, which is actually physically impossible. So instead of being realistic, this is meant to demonstrate the sculptor's advanced knowledge of human anatomy, and to show off his skill set as an artist. Also, gladiators were Roman, not Greek, so this guy was probably made by a Greek artist for a Roman patron. One last thing before you go. Most of the statues I've just shown you are marble. In fact, many Greek artists preferred to work with bronze when making statues, but the Romans wanted copies of Greek statues, often in marble. So most of the marble statues that you see are actually later copies made by Romans of Greek originals. Also, all of these statues are stark white and clean, but this isn't how they would have looked in antiquity. The Greeks loved color, and more recent studies have found that many ancient statues were painted in vibrant hues, and the paint has completely faded or been washed off over time. Some statues would have even had gold and silver painted on them. In the last few minutes, we've taken a tour through time to see the evolution of Greek sculpture. Early Greek art in the Archaic period was heavily influenced by Egyptian and Near Eastern art, and the characters weren't very lifelike, with rigid features and little movement. That started to change in the Transitional period, where we start to see a hint of what's yet to come in the Classical period, where the Greeks really hit their stride. Classical artists began to play around with movement and expression, and by the Hellenistic period, statues were looking realistic or even hyper-realistic, as artists were being commissioned to make works for private audiences to enjoy in their own homes. Thanks for listening. Be sure to stop by our gallery when we're back open to see these and other examples of ancient art in person.